Get down. And today we are talking about my 2024 wrap-up. I read a lot of really amazing books this year, so my plan for this video is to basically talk about the ones that I've read and just give you a little bit of insight on what they're about and what I thought of them personally. I did technically exceed my goal this year. It was originally 24 books and I did end up reading 25. However, I don't know what you guys think about counting shorter books and also comics, which to be fair was not the majority of what I read by any means, but I always feel really bad about counting them, so let me know what you guys think of that in the comments. So technically I didn't read like 25 super long books or anything, but I did read, like the majority were like a decent page count and also full-length books. But a couple at the end were very short just because I was trying to meet my goal, and it has been a really hectic couple of months, so I kind of just wanted to get it done. Like, I really haven't been feeling a lot like reading the past month, so I did kind of stick to shorter books just to meet the goal. I consider myself to be a pretty slow reader. It really depends on the book itself, but it's not always the easiest for me to meet my goal, so I've been very proud of myself the past 2 years where I've met 20 and 25 as a goal, and that's the first time that's ever happened. So even though some of these books are not that long, I am proud of myself. So that being said, let's get into it. So the first book I read in January was The Borrowers by Mary Norton. It's basically the book series that inspired the Ghibli movie Arrietty. Now, I used to love Arrietty growing up, and then I rewatched it with a friend of mine recently, and I'm just like, this movie is so much, I don't know, like it wasn't as good as I remembered, which was kind of sad because I remembered really liking it when I was little, but now I'm not the biggest fan of it. I did, however, ask for the Borrowers box set from Christmas because, I don't know, I just really wanted to read all the books that inspired Ghibli movies, so I figured I should add that to the list. I also have Totoro, Kiki, and Howl's Moving Castle, which I should make some videos on in the future. But The Borrowers was not my favorite. I actually gave it 4 stars. I don't know, if you guys don't know the premise, it's about people who are kind of small like fairies, and it's about how they, you know, move around their spaces with humans and how they avoid them, but they also need humans to collect items that they need to survive, like, you know, sewing needles and sugar and just little tiny things that they take from people. And it's about Arrietty making a connection with a human boy and how that plays out. The book was very cute, but definitely not my favorite of like the Ghibli books that I've read. The next book I read was Aunt Maria by Diana Wynne Jones. I have to look at the synopsis on this. This book is vibes to me. I think the premise, because I read it at the beginning of this year, and I loved it because Diana Wynne Jones is my #1 favorite author ever. I gave the book 5 stars. Basically though, it's about these 2 siblings that go to visit their great Aunt Maria after their dad has, I think he died is what I remember. And so they go to visit his aunt, and the book is like about magic and like the kind of like witchy magic and like, you know, the Aunt Maria being a little different than everyone thinks she is and all that. But from someone who has narcissistic people in my family, I related to this book so much. Like, Diana Wynne Jones 100% had a narcissist in her life because she always writes those types of characters so authentically. So this book was like, I think, frustrating at times, but it also had so much like empowerment, like female empowerment, and it talked a lot about misogyny, but like, I don't know, I just feel like it was a really interesting kind of different book for her. It's contemporary fantasy, so it's like low fantasy from what I remember, but it was amazing. Like, I want to read it again like as soon as possible, so I highly recommend it. The next book I read was Howl's Moving Castle, which if any of you have seen the movie, it's very similar. This young lady gets turned into an old lady by an evil witch, and she kind of just doesn't really care. Like, she like, in the book, she kind of doesn't, from what I remember, she doesn't really like try to change it. She's just like, this is my life now. And then she goes to live with a wizard named Wizard Howl who lives in a moving castle. The book, this is the only case ever in my life where I felt like a movie was better than the book. I've read the book twice now, and it's like probably one of my least favorite that Diana Wynne Jones has read. I did give it 4 stars because it's Howl's Moving Castle and it's very cute, but I just think that Diana Wynne Jones is such an impressive author, and I feel like her brilliance isn't really shown in this book as much as others. So I am kind of comparing it to her other books because this is the first one I ever read of hers, and it made me kind of not like her that much at the beginning. And that's sad because she's my favorite author now, but this series in general is just like not my favorite of hers. I feel like I feel like the movie kind of, I don't know, it was very clear and concise compared to the book. The book is very episodic and kind of feels all over the place, and there's also too many characters in my opinion. Like, you know, I've heard this about writing, like if you have one character, or if you have like multiple characters or multiple people in your life that you want to write about in like a memoir or a nonfiction story, try to consolidate it to one character so it doesn't confuse the audience. The Howl's Moving Castle book did not do that. She had 2 sisters, and then they both had like significant others from what I remember, and it was kind of a disaster. It was so much. Like, I feel like Howl and Sophie were the most interesting part of it, but sometimes they were kind of put on the back burner a little bit. Like, even at the very end of the book, I felt like her sisters were just taking up a little too much time and space. Also in this book, it's not really a romance till the last like 2 chapters. Like, they do not care about each other at all. And I just feel like the movie did it a little better, but it was still a very cute book. It just wasn't, like, once again, as good as the movie. The next book I read was Buffy the Vampire Slayer Coyote Moon, and I gave it 3 stars, which I don't do very often on books. That's like my low rating. I don't ever really give anything 2 stars, or I haven't so far, but this book was not good. And I know it's like it's a book based off a TV show. How good is it gonna be? I get that. But I just hoped that the characters would kind of feel more like themselves. I don't know what I was expecting going into it. Like, obviously this is not gonna be the best book ever, but Buffy was so bitchy and like was not a good friend, and she was very petty. Giles felt like a weak kind of dummy who like couldn't handle anything without Buffy's help. And then they like sexualized a little bit Xander and Willow, and it was supposed to take place in season 1 or 2, which means they were really young, and I hated that. So overall, I feel like this book was not good. I put on my review on Goodreads that if this author wrote his own stories, it maybe would be better. But when you're going into it with the perception of how these characters should act, it's not them. Like, you really can't even think of it as them to enjoy the book. It's a weird one too. Like, I don't know, it was just a bad, like, was not Buffy. Oh, I think the next book I read was Archer's Goon by Diana Wynne Jones. This was another book that's very hard to explain. Because like, the thing with her books is that the descriptions never do it justice and never really explain what it's actually about. So I guess the way I would explain it is there are these, I think, 7 to 8 siblings who are targeting this guy. And I don't remember, I think basically this guy magically, his writing has like fueled their lifestyles or something. Maybe I'm remembering this wrong. Basically, they're trying to get him to like write this very specific story, I think, in order to escape the town and then rule the world. It's like, once again, her books can be such a fever dream sometimes. So he keeps refusing to do it. But then the siblings control a lot of the town. They control different parts of it, so like their power can go out and they cannot get food, and there can be construction going on in their town that's driving them crazy, and they could like, I think, even lose jobs or get bullied at school, all because the siblings have so much pull in the town and like so much control over everything around them. And then it's about this goon who comes to live with them, who's working for one of the siblings. And he's also trying to get the guy to write the book, and he's refusing. The weirdest book ever. The ending was so bad. I gave it 3 stars. This is like probably, other than Castle in the Air, which is the second Howl's Moving Castle book, I think this might actually be my least favorite book she's ever written. It is so bad. I love her so much. I know it doesn't sound like it based on these reviews, but this book was not it. It was so weird. The next book I read in March, I think, was Traveler by Ellie Delano. This is one of my favorite books ever written. I've read it I think 4 times, and she's coming out with a 3rd book next year, which I'm like freaking out about because it's been 6 years since these books were released, and she said it was just going to be a duology, but now it's going to be a 3rd book. I'm dying. But anyway, the first book is about a girl named Jessa who basically writes non-stop about this fictional character named Finn, who she dreams about every night. And she's obsessed with him. She has all of these like memories with him from her dreams and these little moments they share together, and probably like romantically a little bit. But she doesn't think he's real until one day he shows up where she's working and invites her to coffee. And in real life, and she's just like, what is happening? And so she goes to coffee with him and finds out that she is a dreamer, and she has the power to travel to different realities through mirrors and dreams. Sorry, no, she's a traveler, not a dreamer. But she has the power to travel to alternate realities through mirrors, and all the dreams she was having are also different realities. Finn comes to her and tells her about that and teaches her how to travel, and then also tells her that somebody is basically killing her off in every reality because there are alternate versions of every person in these realities, and she's getting killed in every single one of them. So together they have to figure out who's killing her off and try to stop it. Such a good book. Like, honestly, I cannot recommend this enough. It is so underrated. It is amazing. And I am going to be freaking out next year when the 3rd book comes out. I've never been so excited for a book ever. After that, I read Dreamer, which was the 2nd book in the series, which I will not tell you guys about because obviously spoilers. But then after that, I read Gravity Falls Lost Legends for the 2nd time. Basically, it's just like 4 short stories in comic form for the TV show Gravity Falls. It's amazing. Like, it feels like episodes, and I think they probably were like maybe episode ideas that didn't come to fruition, but they are so good. Like, if you're a fan of Gravity Falls, you have to read this because it is amazing. And yeah, they're just great. They're so fun. After that, I read Thomas the Rhymer by Ellen Kushner. This book is probably one of my favorites now. I never had read it before this year, but it's amazing. It's based off of I think it's I want to say a Scottish folk tale, I'm sorry if that's wrong, maybe Irish, called, Thomas the Rhymer. And it's basically about his journey being bewitched by a fairy queen, or an elf, I think it's a fairy queen, and he gets taken off to fairyland for 7 years. And just something about the way this particular retelling was written, it's just beautiful. It's so romantic, and like the writing style is gorgeous, and it feels like, I don't know how to explain it exactly, but it's like there's just so much desperation to Thomas, and it like ruins, what happens to him ruins kind of the person that he once was, but also the relationships he was making in his own real life, and how he like was so immature at the beginning of the book, and then by the end he's so different and so hardened by the world in a way. And it's a beautiful book. I would love to teach a writing class one day at some point in the future, and if I ever do, I want to make my students read this book and dissect it because it was a breathtaking book that I cannot recommend enough. The next book that I read in 2024 was my own book, Killing Spirits. It is technically on Goodreads, but it's not available to buy. Basically, think the TV show Revolution mixed with The Last of Us and put some fantasy and magic into it, and you've got my book. After that, I read a retelling of Tamlin, which is a Scottish ballad that I am obsessed with, and I've been obsessed with for about 2 years. It was basically like a picture book version of it. I have a couple of those, and it basically was just like its own spin on it, and it kind of added more detail than the initial ballad did, which was really cool to see. But basically, Tamlin is about this girl who goes into the forest despite everyone telling her not to, and she stumbles upon a guy named Tamlin who supposedly has been cursed by fairies and the fairy queen herself, and needs the main girl Janet's help to break his curse and live happily ever after. It is like my favorite story now. I think I gave this one 5 stars. I gave my own book 5 stars too, but you know. But yeah, Tamlin is just an amazing, Beautiful story, very similar and kind of correlated with Tam Lin because it's both about the fairy queen whisking guys away and then sometimes the girl having to swoop in and help. But yeah, it's like, I love both of them so much. They're such beautiful stories, and I'm planning on reading like a lot of retellings of it, including ACOTAR, which is weirdly kind of referencing it, but I don't know how. But I'm interested to know how, so I will probably make a vlog whenever I read that too. But yeah. The next book I read was Fire and Hemlock, which is also by Diana Wynne Jones. It is my favorite book she's ever written, like of all time. It is also a Tam Lin retelling, and it's breathtaking. It's about this little girl who kind of stumbles her way into a funeral that she's not supposed to be at, and she meets this guy named Tom Lin, and they kind of end up connected through a story they create together about like two superheroes, and like, you know, she's the sidekick and everything. But the stories start to kind of come to life, and it's basically about like these two worlds that she's kind of living in. The magic is woven in so subtly that sometimes you don't even notice it, but basically how her mundane life as, you know, growing up and having a hard time with like her family life and her home life and her parents getting a divorce and not having the nicest friends and just kind of feeling isolated and alone, how that kind of parallels with her adventures with Tom Lin whenever she gets to see him, which is not very often, but when they, you know, her creativity and imagination is sparked every time they're together, and she kind of gets to be a kid again even though she's growing up and everything. And it's a beautiful book. It took me 5 weeks this year to annotate it because it's such a confusing book if you don't read it a handful of times, and I was like, I want to understand it now. I don't want to wait until my 3rd or 4th read to understand it, so I decided to take this second time of reading it to annotate. And I understood most of it. The ending is still very confusing, but I kind of understood it like a million times better than I did the first time reading it. So I highly recommend this book. If you want to start with any Diana Wynne Jones book, I don't know if this is a good one to start with because it's very confusing, but I appreciated it and I loved the challenge of reading it. It made it so much more fun, so it's a good one. The next 3 things I read were the Life is Strange comics. They're okay. Like, I liked the games a lot. The comics were okay. I don't even remember what they're about necessarily. I think it's just about going to different like alternate realities, and I don't even know, man. I read this in summer and I don't even remember what it's about now. I think Max just has to go to different realities because like I think that like 2 separate realities are kind of like mixing together, and then Max has to kind of make sense of it and sort through things that are happening. I don't know, but it was okay. Not my favorite. The next book that I read was also a Diana Wynne Jones book. There were going to be a lot of these, called Cart and Quitter in the Dalemark Quartet. I think there are 4 books in the series. I read the first one. It's about a traveling quartet, their family, and they travel in their wagon and do different shows and everything, and one of them has a magical instrument. It's kind of like fantasy, and then this military comes in and kind of ruins everything for them, so then the main character, who's like young, kind of has to like take more charge on things, and he's kind of discovering who he is, and I don't know. It was a good book. It's just something about it didn't feel very strong. Like, I gave it 4 stars. I don't know, it just wasn't like one of her strongest. I'd like to reread it eventually and maybe finish the series eventually, but like, it just wasn't my favorite of hers. After that, I read Deep Secret by Diana Wynne Jones. That one also took me like 5 weeks, and I loved it. It was so weird and interesting. I gave it 5 stars as well. Deep Secret is basically about this society of people who, it's kind of like basically there are different levels of universes. A word means there is more magic in a world, and then nay word means there is less, which we live in a nay word world because we have less magic in ours. It's basically about these like the society of people in kind of this sci-fi world who are in charge of all the universes and kind of controlling things to fit what their needs are. And it's about this guy who's trying to find a replacement for I think it's a Magid, which are basically people who control all the universes, and he's trying to find someone to replace his who died. So he goes to our world to try to find a replacement, but he goes to like a sci-fi convention to like, he basically coordinates it so all the candidates are in this sci-fi convention at the same time, so he can figure out which one is a good fit. I loved it. It was such a fun time. It was such a fun book. It was like one of my favorites of hers, like top 5 probably. I loved it. It was so much fun. After that, I read My very first Brandon Sanderson book ever, Frugal Wizard's Handbook for Surviving Medieval England. If you think of that title, you would probably think it was a fantasy book. Not really. It's kind of more sci-fi, like basically in the future people get these little worlds they can go to that are historically accurate, and they basically can just go there for vacation, and they get augments and like gadgets and gizmos from like their sci-fi universe, and they can basically show off to like historical people, but they're like not really people because the world is all like artificial. It's a weird book. I gave it 3 stars because it wasn't very good, and it's kind of put a bad taste in my mouth for Brandon Sanderson. But I read the reviews and a lot of people didn't like it either, which makes me kind of wonder, like maybe it just wasn't one of his best, I don't know. But I'll give his books a try again in the future. It just was not for me. I read it in like a week though because I was trying to get through it so fast. I'm like, it's gonna take me too long if I let my hatred of it slow me down. So after that I read Enchanted Glass by Diana Wynne Jones, which is basically about this guy who his grandfather died, so he inherits his house, and then this little boy whose grandmother died comes to the house basically in need of help because there are people who are after him, and basically both of them have magic that they're kind of learning how to use and use to defend themselves and everything. And there's also a stained glass window in the grandfather's house that also has magic and kind of relates to stuff. I gave this 4 stars. For the most part, the grief in it was written really well, which I always appreciate a lot in books. It's very important to me. But like overall, it wasn't one of her best either. I think I had such high expectations for it that it kind of could only let me down because I had built this one up so much in my head for 2 years, and then I finally read it and was like, it's not that good. But it's cute, it's just not my favorite. After that I read 5 Survive, and I read that, like I think I mentioned earlier in this video that I can be a slow reader. I read this book in 4 days, 3 days? I think I may have read it in, let me see. I read it in about 3 days. It's amazing. Also very good with the grief, amazing, like almost perfect with the grief portrayals. But yeah, 5 Survive is basically about this girl who goes on a road trip with, I think, her 4 friends, because there were 5 of them. No. Oh, Adrian, get down. Alright, it's the next day because, as you probably noticed, my dog does not handle fireworks very well, so it is officially January 1st today. 5 Survive is about this young girl whose mom just died, and once again the grief portrayals in this book are amazing. It's like so nice and refreshing seeing books recently that like handle grief properly. But basically her mom just died, and she possibly has some OCD, but I think it's more just like a grief thing because she's very, very similar to me. I related to her so much. But basically she's on this road trip with 5 other people, and she is kind of in her own world and she can't really focus very well either. She's kind of spacing out and just like paying attention to tiny little details in the RV more than like actual conversations with people, and she has a hard time kind of speaking up for herself, and I love her so much. The character, literally nothing to do with the plot, I'm just raving about her because I love her. But anyway, so as she's in the RV with the 5 people who she's kind of known since she was like little, basically they end up stranded in the middle of nowhere in the RV, and one tire goes out. And then they replace it, takes forever to do it, and then they're back on the road, and then as soon as they start to go again, all 4 tires pop. And basically there is a sniper in the woods somewhere that they can't see, and he's keeping them from being able to leave. And as I said before, I think, did I say it before? I don't know, it's been like, 12 hours. My memory is not that good. What was I saying? What was I just saying? Oh, as I was saying before, I read this in like 3 days because it was so good, and I don't normally do that with books, but this one was incredible. The next one I read was One of Us is Lying by Karen McManus. Sorry if I'm saying that wrong. I read this book because I had read 5 Survive, and I didn't want to read another Holly Jackson book. I did really badly, but I wasn't sure about the content warnings in her other books because there are certain topics that kind of get to me, so I wanted to wait to just like check out her other books a little bit more and see if they were something I would handle alright. Instead I went to One of Us is Lying, which is basically about a high school kid who gets murdered, or supposedly gets murdered, like they don't totally know what happened, but he basically ends up having some allergic reaction to peanut oil. And they're like, how did he even get that? Because he was shut in a room with like 4 other students and a teacher, and they're like not totally sure what happened exactly, but it's kind of implied through the whole thing that one of the other students is the one that did it, and they're being questioned by the police, and their whole world is getting flipped upside down, and it's like very chaotic, and you're following all 4 characters' perspectives throughout the chapters. I was not a fan of this book. I gave it 3 stars. I was gonna give it 4, and then I kind of started writing my review, and then I was like, this is a 3 star. I kind of felt like with the flipping of perspectives, it was a little annoying because it kind of didn't, like, I feel like if you're gonna do a story that's written from multiple perspectives, you have to make sure that each character is in the same progression as the others in the story. For instance, I felt like one character kind of started to come to a climax in his story, and then when it flipped to a different perspective, like this huge thing happens for him, and I was kind of interested to see what the reaction and the build-up was going to be, and then we finally get to the peak of what was going to happen, and then it flips to another character, and it's like, anyway, they went out shopping today, or bicycle riding, or something like mundane after that. But we never really got to see this character's reaction to this big thing, and it frustrated me because I'm like, because that's another problem too. When you switch perspectives, it doesn't just like lead from where they left off with the character they left behind. It skips like a few days after that too. So it was really annoying, and then I felt like it was more of like a high school drama than actually focusing on the mystery, because through the whole thing I'm like, I have no clue what possibly could have happened because it sounds like none of them did it, and then at the last second they drop in this detail that they, I swear, did not mention before that point, and then I was like, oh well, duh. I'm like, if that's a factor, then yeah. And then I guessed it. But it was just like so weird. Like, it was so high school and not enough mystery, which is why it took me like a little longer than it should have for me to read it. And like, I felt like the one thing that would have probably fixed most of the book for me is if there were more red herrings. I wish that it was like, oh, so and so has this type of car that crashed during Simon's death, or this person knows a lot about, like, you know, allergies, and this one has peanut oil in their kitchen, or like the mom mentions that it was missing for some reason, or whatever. I feel like each character needed some type of motive but also opportunity, and instead we just got like high school drama for like 300 pages, and then the last like 50 were like, this is what happened, and I'm like, okay. So it just like wasn't as good as it could have been. The next book that I read was 4 Quartets by T.S. Eliot. So this is a poetry book, kind of about like, it's hard to explain. It's like parallels, but also like, it's really a difficult one to describe because I don't read a lot of poetry, so I'm sure someone else could explain what it's about a little bit better. But the reason I picked it up was because Diana Wynne Jones said that it inspired Fire and Hemlock, and she basically used the poem as the outline for the book. When it talks about like seeing faces, I think, in like water and nowhere and now here, and how there are these parallels and these like things that can coexist, she basically structured the entire book around the poem. And because the poem, like, it talks about winter and it talks about roses a lot, which is a big theme in the second book in the series that I'm writing, I thought maybe I could try to outline my book around it too, or at least get some inspiration. It took me way too long to read it though. It was only 60 pages. I just didn't really make it the priority. I think I gave it 4 stars because by the end I didn't love it, but it's a very beautiful poem that I actually do recommend reading. I think at some point I just kind of got tired of it. Like, I should have just read it in one sitting instead of pacing it out so much. But it was really good, and I annotated a lot of it and left some notes in the book to kind of inspire some ideas, so I'm definitely going to go back and look over all of that, but it was a cool story. The next book I read was Dulcie's Taste of Magic, which, who wrote it? Gail Herman. This was one of the, I don't know if you guys ever had those, I mean, a lot of you did, those Tinkerbell books growing up. I loved them, but I think I pretty much, did I read any others? I think I may have read Beck and Bess's, possibly, because those two were my favorites. And then I went to the pediatrician when I was little, and she let me pick a book off of her bookshelf for free. So I ended up getting Dulcie's Taste of Magic, and that felt so cool to me because I only had like the core characters in a little box set that I had. I didn't even know they had other books, so it was really cool getting it. So it's basically about a fairy named Dulcie who her talent is baking and like just she's so incredible with food. She makes some mistakes one day because she's kind of, everything's really frantic and she's a little worn out. And so, what is the queen's name again? I'm forgetting now, but she basically, it starts with a C. She basically tells Dulcie that she should take a little bit of a break because she doesn't want her to be tired and worn out and she's never had a vacation. So Dulcie hates that. She like wants to keep working. She feels like this fairy named Ginger is gonna take over her kitchen too, which she's trying to do. Dulcie's like trying to kind of relax and like visit other talent fairies, and then she kind of starts to learn a little bit how to relax, but she wants to go back. She learns a huge lesson through it. The reason I read it again this year is because my sister Flora is going to be born in February, and I wanted to record the book to have her listen to while she's in the womb. So I recorded it in one sitting. I think I gave it 5 stars. I was so stupid. I read it like 2 years ago or a year ago, and apparently I was being a little bit of a snob back then because I gave it 4 stars. And then after reading it this time around, I'm like, it's a kid's book. Like, why am I judging this so harshly? Like, it was really good. So it was cute. So I gave it 5 stars because why not? But yeah, if you have kids or even if you're just a Tinkerbell fan, I highly recommend this book because I love this character. She's so nostalgic for me. After that, I read The Tale of Tamlin, which is basically like this kind of really simplified version of the Ballad of Tamlin for kids. It's very short too. This one I also recorded for Flora, but I think I'm gonna probably just read it to her when she's born. But yeah, very simplified version of it. Very like, you know, girl goes into the woods, Tamlin asks her to help with breaking the curse. She does, happily ever after. But it's very cute, and because there are some darker themes in some of the ballads, like, you know, fairies dragging people to hell and things like that, this is such a good version to read with your kids, in my opinion, because it's a very chill. The next thing I read was To Build a Fire by Jack London, just the short story. I have like a book of his stories, but I just read that one because I read it for school years ago. I had this I was homeschooled, and for like a few months we had this one course I did online where basically for English, I would read short stories every week and then kind of dissect them. And now, like, I honestly love the program so much. I wish I knew what it was called because I'd love to like track it down, but I found so many amazing stories through it. I don't remember who did this one, but I read the story called The Sniper and The Heron and a little bit of the Joy Luck Club. I read like part of the first chapter for it, and it was so fun. Oh, I read The Gift of the Magi for the first time because of it. So I also read To Build a Fire, which is basically about this guy who goes into the Yukon in the dead of winter, and he thinks he knows everything, and despite people telling him that it's not safe to be out there because it's way too freezing cold, he thinks that he can handle it perfectly fine. He brings this husky dog with him. The dog's instincts are so much better than the humans, and the dog is like, why the heck are we out here? This is a horrible idea. But the dog doesn't talk, don't worry. And the guy just keeps going and going, and like basically everything that can possibly go wrong goes wrong. And I love the story so much. I will just say that it is a very animal pet friendly book. The dog does not die, but it's just like, it's just like one of my favorite short stories ever. It's so funny to me. I don't know why it's so sick that I find it funny, but I do. So that was the last thing I read this year, and even though a lot of those were kind of shorter, that book did technically put me to 25 books this year instead of 24, even though it once again was like 30 pages. But my goal for this year is 2025 is to read 30 books with a combination of long and short, because there's a lot of 600-page books I really want to read this year, but then I also figured I could hit it up to 30 because I'll also be reading Flora, a lot of shorter books as well. So I figured when I blend all those into them like together, I'll get a lot more than I usually do. And you know, with this channel too, I also want to make it more authentic and realistic, because I know sometimes when people read like hundreds of books in a year, it can make people feel very discouraged that they can't also do that. But you know, I'm very proud of myself for setting a goal of 30, because it's way different than 24 like I tried to do last year, and way different than 20 that I did the year before, and extremely different from barely hitting 5 books 2022 and before. So I'm very proud of myself, and I'm just gonna keep building up and up until I can maybe reach 100, but if not, it's okay too, because I'm just like enjoying it. And I think you should read whatever you want despite it, even if it's not popular, and you should read as much as you want, because there's no point in torturing yourself over it, because then it's not a hobby, it's just a chore. So, but yeah, this year I'm trying to read 30, mixing in some Tinkerbell books with Hounds of Morrigan and Secret History, which I'm like this is a little daunting, but I'm gonna try to do all of those. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Oh, I also started A Christmas Carol last month, and I started a book called Winter Rose by, I think her name is Patricia McKellar, or McKillip. And I'm going to try to finish those books in January and then try to add one more book on top of it. I don't know exactly what I'm doing yet, but I probably will do a TBR for either January or the year itself. I just like, it's kind of a mess right now because I'm a mood reader, so I have like 40 books on my TBR and I don't know what I'm reading in what order yet. So if you guys want, I can show you my TBR as well because there's a lot on it. But yeah, I have a lot of plans for the future with this channel, with like bookshelf organizing and like talking more about my TBRs, talking about my writing as well. I want to do a bunch of writing vlogs because I kind of, I figured out basically how to write 4 books in a year. So I won't be making a video about that and my journey trying to do that, because that is the most extreme goal I have ever had, and I'm really looking forward to actually trying to do it. So yeah, if you guys want to come along this journey for me, I would be very happy to have you guys. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next time and throughout the rest of the year for whatever this journey holds. Bye, see you next time.